When a black family moved into a quiet suburban neighborhood, they expected a fresh start. But for one HOA board member, known for her iron grip over the community, their arrival was unacceptable. Karen made it her mission to force them out, flooding them with fines, complaints, and constant harassment. What Karen didn't know was that while she was busy trying to destroy their peace, her own financial troubles were mounting. And in a twist she never saw coming, the same family she tried to push out of the neighborhood ended up buying her dream house at Foreclosure, claiming not only their right to belong, but also the very home she once used to boast about. The Johnson family had worked hard for everything they had. David was a civil engineer, meticulous and steady, the kind of man who believed in doing things right the first time. His wife, Monique, was a high school English teacher with a warm personality that made her instantly likable to anyone who gave her a chance. Together, they had saved for years to afford their new home, a beautiful two-story house in a neighborhood that promised peace, good schools, and a safe place for their children. Maya and Jordan to grow up. Moving day was full of excitement. Neighbors came by to wave hello, some offering plates of cookies or words of welcome. The kids quickly found other children to ride bikes with on the cul-de-sac. For the Johnsons, it felt like the fresh start they had been dreaming about. But not everyone was pleased to see them. Karen, the self-appointed queen bee of the HOA board, had lived in the neighborhood for more than a decade. She treated it less like a collection of homes and more like her personal fiefdom. In her mind, nothing happened without her say-so. She was the type to walk the streets with a clipboard, noting down which lawns needed trimming, which trash cans weren't pulled in on time, and which cars looked out of place. She prided herself on upholding standards, though most people quietly admitted that she took things far beyond reason. When she saw the Johnsons move in, Karen didn't greet them with cookies or a smile. Instead, she stood at the edge of her driveway, arms crossed, watching every box unloaded from the moving truck. Her eyes narrowed, not with curiosity, but with judgment. David noticed but shrugged it off. "Some people just need time," he told Monique as they unpacked. "We'll win her over eventually." Monique, ever the optimist, agreed. Maybe she's just cautious. Not everyone knows how to welcome new neighbors. But Karen had no intention of welcoming them. In her mind, the Johnsons were outsiders who didn't belong. She had spent years curating her vision of what the neighborhood should be, and their presence didn't fit that image. It wasn't about noise, property upkeep, or rules. It was about control, and she intended to make sure they knew exactly who was in charge. At first, it was small things. Karen left a note in their mailbox just a week after they moved in, citing a supposed violation for leaving their trash bins on the curb too long. David double-checked the rules and found they had brought them in well within the allowed time. He decided to let it slide, thinking it was just a misunderstanding. Then came a complaint about their lawn. "Grass must be maintained at a uniform height," the letter read. David had mowed the lawn only 3 days earlier, and it looked perfectly fine. He took photos just to be safe, but again, he chose not to stir the pot. Monique noticed the pattern. "She's testing us," she said one evening as they sat on the porch. "She wants to see if we'll fight back or roll over." David nodded slowly. "Let's not give her the satisfaction. We'll keep everything spotless, follow every rule. If she's going to come after us, she won't have a leg to stand on." But Karen didn't need a leg to stand on. She was the type who invented reasons if none existed. She began watching their house more closely, often seen lingering near their yard with her ever-present clipboard. Neighbors whispered that she had a habit of harassing anyone who didn't fall in line, but most were too intimidated to challenge her. Karen had built a reputation for being relentless, and no one wanted to be her next target. For the Johnsons, it became clear that Karen wasn't just strict, she was hostile. If Jordan's basketball rolled into her yard, she appeared instantly, returning it with a sneer and a lecture about respecting property lines. If Maya had friends over after school, Karen complained about traffic on the street, even though there were only 2 cars parked out front. Every move they made seemed to irritate her. Still, the Johnsons refused to let her ruin their happiness. They hosted barbecues with friendly neighbors, helped mow an elderly resident's lawn, and built genuine connections with others who appreciated their kindness. Slowly, they began earning respect in the community, not because of anything flashy, but because they carried themselves with quiet dignity in the face of Karen's hostility. Karen, however, saw their growing acceptance as a threat. In her mind, she was losing her grip. People were supposed to look to her for guidance, not gravitate toward the newcomers. It stung her pride to see the Johnsons becoming part of the neighborhood fabric despite her attempts to keep them out. Her resentment grew, and with resentment came escalation. Karen began filing official HOA complaints in rapid succession. Too many visitors, improper landscaping, cars parked at a slight angle in the driveway. Each complaint carried a small fine, and though the Johnsons disputed them, the process was draining. It wasn't about money, it was about principle. "She wants us gone," Monique said one night, tossing another complaint letter onto the kitchen counter. "She thinks if she makes life miserable enough, we'll pack up and leave." David exhaled heavily, rubbing his temples. "We've worked too hard to let her push us out. This is our home, and we're not going anywhere." Those words settled over the family like a shield. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they were determined. What they didn't know yet was that while Karen tried to tighten her grip on the neighborhood, her own world was beginning to crumble. And soon, the very family she was trying to destroy would be the ones holding the keys to her prized possession, her dream house. By the second month in their new home, the Johnsons realized Karen's hostility wasn't slowing down. It was picking up speed. Each week brought a new letter from the HOA, each complaint more absurd than the last. One morning, David opened the mailbox to find yet another envelope stamped with the HOA logo. He sighed before he even tore it open. This time, the letter accused them of improperly stored garden equipment. David walked around the house baffled, until he realized what Karen was talking about. A small watering can and a bag of soil leaned neatly by the side of the shed. Hardly an eyesore, and certainly not against any bylaw he had read. Monique shook her head when he showed her. "She's just fishing now. Anything she can twist into a violation, she will." They decided to attend the next HOA meeting to address the nonsense directly. When they arrived, the room was filled with the usual mix of board members and residents. Karen, of course, sat near the front with her clipboard, lips pursed as though she was holding the community together single-handedly. When the floor opened for discussion, David raised his hand. "I'd like to address the repeated complaints being filed against my family. We've received notices about our lawn, our trash bins, even a watering can by our shed. None of these are actual violations under the bylaws." Karen immediately cut in. "The rules are clear, Mr. Johnson. This neighborhood has standards, and if you can't meet them—" "The standards," David interrupted firmly, "are written down, and we are following them. What's happening here isn't enforcement. It's harassment." A murmur rippled through the room. Several neighbors shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware of Karen's antics but hesitant to speak up. One older gentleman finally did. "He's right. I've lived here 15 years, and I've never seen complaints filed like this before. The Johnsons keep their property cleaner than most of us." Karen's face flushed. "I take my duties seriously. If some of you are too lax to care about property values, that's on you. But I won't stand by while new residents lower our standards." The Johnsons left that meeting knowing Karen wouldn't stop. But something else became clear too. Not everyone was on her side. Some neighbors were beginning to see through her crusade. Still, the harassment continued. One Saturday morning, Maya's birthday party turned into Karen's next target. The Johnsons had invited a handful of kids from school, set up balloons in the yard, and played cheerful music at a perfectly reasonable volume. Within an hour, Karen was at the fence again, demanding they turn it down. "This is a residential area, not a carnival," she snapped, her voice cutting through the laughter of children. "You can't just take over the block like this." Monique, exhausted from weeks of Karen's nonsense, finally pushed back. "Karen, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We're well within the rules." "You don't get to police our family gathering," Karen sneered. "We'll see what the board has to say about this." True to her word, another complaint arrived the following week. Excessive noise and disruption to community peace. It was so absurd that even the HOA president called David personally. "Between you and me," he admitted, "this is getting out of hand. Karen has filed more complaints against you in 2 months than we've received from the entire neighborhood in a year." That call gave the Johnsons some hope. But Karen wasn't done. She began spreading rumors. Quietly at first, then louder when she thought she had an audience. She told neighbors that the Johnsons had constant visitors, implying something shady was going on. She whispered that their kids were rowdy and undisciplined. At one point, she even hinted that David was running a side business out of the garage, though no such thing was true. The gossip hurt, not because people believed it, most didn't, but because it revealed just how far Karen was willing to go. She wasn't content with fines and complaints. She wanted to poison the family's reputation, to make them feel unwelcome in their own home. And yet, the Johnsons refused to take the bait. "We can't stoop to her level," Monique reminded David whenever his frustration boiled over. "If we keep doing what's right, people will see the truth." But behind closed doors, the stress weighed heavily. Jordan began asking why Karen hated them, and Maya grew anxious about inviting friends over. What was supposed to be a happy chapter in their lives had turned into a constant battle against one woman's obsession with control. It might have gone on indefinitely, if not for the cracks beginning to show in Karen's own life. Neighbors started noticing small things at her house. A neglected yard that had once been immaculate, a car with expired registration, packages piling up on her porch. Karen was so focused on tormenting the Johnsons that she seemed to be letting her own affairs slip. And though she kept up appearances at meetings, bragging about her dream house and her importance on the board, whispers began circulating that not everything was as perfect as she wanted people to believe. The Johnsons didn't know it yet, but Karen's campaign against them was about to backfire in the worst way possible. Because while she was spending her time and energy trying to force them out, her own financial foundation was crumbling beneath her feet. And when the truth came out, the entire neighborhood would see just how fragile the queen bee really was. By the third month, the Johnsons were exhausted. The joy of moving into their dream home had been buried under a mountain of complaint letters, petty fines, and whispered gossip. Every time David opened the mailbox, his stomach tightened, half expecting another envelope from the HOA. One evening, after yet another violation notice about improperly parked vehicles, when Monique's sister had simply parked on the street during a visit, David finally said what they had both been thinking. "This has to stop," he muttered, tossing the letter onto the kitchen counter. "We've tried to keep our heads down. We've followed every rule, and it doesn't matter. She's not going to stop until we fight back." Monique, who had been helping Maya with homework, looked up slowly. "I agree. We can't keep letting her set the rules. She thinks if she makes life miserable enough, we'll just give up. We need to show her we're not leaving." That night, David sat down at his laptop and drafted a formal response to the HOA board. He wasn't angry in tone, but he was firm. He detailed every complaint they had received since moving in, attached photos showing compliance with bylaws, and included testimonies from supportive neighbors who had witnessed Karen's harassment. When he sent it off, he felt a small sense of relief, like finally putting his side of the story on record. Monique added one more line before he hit send. "We will not be intimidated, and we will not be forced out of our home." At the next HOA meeting, David and Monique attended together, prepared for whatever Karen might throw at them. Karen arrived as she always did, clipboard in hand, lips pursed, and a smugness that suggested she expected another easy win. She launched into her usual list of violations, reading off complaints as if she were prosecuting a trial. But this time, the Johnsons were ready. David stood and presented his packet of evidence. He spoke calmly but confidently, pointing out the absurdity of Karen's accusations and showing clear proof that they had followed the rules. He even included the phone call from the HOA president, acknowledging Karen's excessive complaints. When he finished, Monique added her voice. "We moved here to raise our children in peace, just like everyone else. We are not asking for special treatment. We are simply asking to be treated fairly. These complaints are not about rules. They are about one person's obsession with control, and we will not allow that to continue." The room fell silent. For the first time, someone had said out loud what many had whispered privately for years. Heads began to nod. One neighbor raised her hand. "She's right. Karen's been doing this to people for as long as I can remember. The Johnsons just happened to be her latest target," another neighbor chimed in. "I've gotten letters for ridiculous things too, but I didn't have the energy to fight it. I'm glad someone finally stood up." Karen's face flushed crimson. She slammed her clipboard onto the table. "You're all ungrateful. I've kept this neighborhood in order for years. Without me, property values would tank and this place would fall apart. If you want chaos, fine. Don't come crying to me when your street looks like a dump." But her words didn't land the way they used to. The board members exchanged looks, clearly weary of her theatrics. The president cleared his throat. "Thank you, Karen. But it's clear that some of these complaints have been excessive. Going forward, the board will review all violation claims before issuing notices. We need to ensure fairness." Karen's jaw dropped. "You can't take away my authority." "It was never your authority," the president replied coolly. "It belongs to the board." For the Johnsons, it was a small but important victory. The endless stream of frivolous letters slowed. Neighbors who had once stayed quiet began openly showing their support. Invitations to backyard barbecues and block parties rolled in, and little by little the Johnsons started to feel the sense of community they had hoped for. Karen, however, couldn't let it go. Losing control gnawed at her pride. She doubled down in other ways. Snide comments in passing, icy stares, muttered remarks about people who don't belong. But her power had been checked, and she knew it. What she didn't know was that her problems were far bigger than the Johnsons. Behind the scenes, her own finances were unraveling. It started with missed mortgage payments. She had stretched herself thin with credit cards, home renovations, and a lifestyle she couldn't really afford. For years, she kept up appearances. Designer handbags, fancy cars, elaborate holiday decorations that turned her home into a local spectacle. She loved bragging at HOA meetings about how much her dream house was worth, presenting herself as the model resident. But the numbers didn't add up. Bills piled up, and notices went unanswered. She had been hiding the truth, hoping to catch up before anyone noticed. But by the time she realized how deep the hole was, it was too late. One evening, as the Johnsons enjoyed dinner on their porch, they noticed Karen's usually pristine yard looking unkempt. Weeds sprouted between the hedges, and the once gleaming shutters had started to fade. Packages sat untouched on her porch for days. Something was off. Monique leaned closer to David. "You see that? She's slipping. Something's going on," David nodded slowly. "Maybe karma's finally catching up." Neither of them could have imagined just how true that would be. Because while Karen had spent months trying to force them out of the neighborhood, she was about to lose the very thing she prized most: her dream house. And when the foreclosure notice went up, it wouldn't just be an ending for her. It would be the ultimate twist of fate for the Johnsons. The news broke quietly at first, but in a small neighborhood, nothing stays secret for long. One morning, a bright orange foreclosure notice appeared on Karen's front door. By midday, whispers had spread from porch to porch. Karen's house, the one she never stopped bragging about, was going to auction. For years, she had lorded that house over the community. She flaunted her granite countertops, her imported fixtures, her perfectly staged furniture. At every HOA meeting, she spoke as though her home were the crown jewel of the neighborhood, proof of her superior taste and status. And now it was slipping through her fingers. The Johnsons heard about it from a neighbor who stopped by their yard. "You won't believe this," he said, lowering his voice. "Karen's house is in foreclosure. Auction's next month." David raised his eyebrows. "Seriously?" The neighbor nodded, almost gleeful. "Guess karma comes around eventually." When Monique heard, she sat back in her chair, stunned. After everything she's put us through, she's losing the one thing she thought made her untouchable. David was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that would change everything. "What if we bought it?" Monique blinked. "Bought her house? Why not? It's a foreclosure. It'll probably sell below market value. We've been talking about investing in a rental property anyway. And just think, she tried so hard to push us out, and we'd end up owning her dream home." At first, Monique laughed at the idea. It sounded too poetic, almost unreal. But the more they discussed it, the more it made sense. They had saved diligently, their finances were in order, and the opportunity was right in front of them. Over the next few weeks, they did their homework. They checked the auction details, secured financing, and consulted with a real estate attorney. Every step made it more real. Meanwhile, Karen tried desperately to keep up appearances. She still walked her dog past the Johnsons' house with her chin high, though the clipboard had disappeared. She still waved off concerned questions from neighbors, insisting everything was under control. But behind closed doors, the facade was crumbling. Bills piled up on her counters, collection notices stacked in drawers, and her phone buzzed constantly with calls she ignored. The day of the auction arrived on a crisp morning. The courthouse steps were crowded with investors, curious neighbors, and a few bargain hunters hoping for a deal. The Johnsons stood quietly off to the side, their paperwork in hand. David's heart pounded in his chest, but his face was calm. When Karen's property was announced, a hush fell over the crowd. Everyone knew this house. It wasn't just any home. It was Karen's house. The irony hung heavy in the air. The bidding began, numbers climbing quickly. David raised his hand at the right moments, steady and controlled. He wasn't reckless. He knew his limits. Another bidder tried to push him higher, but eventually, the competition faltered. With one final call, the gavel came down. "Sold," the auctioneer announced, "to Mr. Johnson." A ripple went through the crowd. Some gasped, others chuckled, and more than a few broke into quiet applause. Word spread almost instantly. The very family Karen had tried to drive out of the neighborhood now owned her dream home. When Karen heard the news, she was livid. She stormed into the HOA president's office the very next day, demanding answers. "You can't let them buy my house! This is harassment! This is discrimination! They're targeting me!" The president, weary of her tirades, simply shook his head. "Karen, it went to public auction. Anyone could have bid. You lost your house because of your own finances. No one did this to you but you." Karen's face twisted in rage. "They don't belong here. I told you from the start." "They belong here as much as anyone," the president interrupted sharply. More frankly, since they actually follow the rules. Maybe it's time you accept that. For Karen, it was the ultimate humiliation. Not only had she lost her home, but she had lost it to the people she had spent months trying to destroy. Her reputation, once inflated with authority, collapsed overnight. The Johnsons, meanwhile, handled their victory with quiet grace. They didn't gloat or rub it in. When neighbors asked what they planned to do with the house, David explained simply, "We'll rent it out. It's an investment, nothing more." But inside, they couldn't deny the poetic justice of it all. They had been told in so many ways that they didn't belong. They had endured fines, complaints, and rumors designed to break them down. And now, they stood not only unbroken, but stronger, owning the very house that symbolized Karen's false superiority. Monique summed it up one evening as they watched their kids ride bikes down the street. "She tried everything to push us out, but in the end, we're still here. And she's the one who's gone." David nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "That's the thing about people like her. They spend so much time trying to control others that they forget to take care of themselves. Sooner or later it catches up. And catch up it had, loudly, publicly, and permanently." Karen's departure was quiet. One day her car was gone, her curtains drawn, and moving trucks lined her driveway. Neighbors watched from a distance, not with sympathy, but with a mix of relief and inevitability. The woman who once strutted around as the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood was leaving in disgrace. For the Johnsons, life settled into peace at last. Without Karen's constant interference, the community felt lighter, more welcoming. Their kids could ride bikes, play outside, and laugh without fear of another bogus complaint. Neighbors who had once kept their distance now greeted them warmly, some even admitting they were glad the Johnsons had stood their ground. As for Karen's former house, the Johnsons rented it out to a young couple who fit in easily and brought no drama. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, but the Johnsons never boasted about it. They didn't need to. The simple fact that they now owned the home Karen once flaunted was victory enough. Karen had tried everything to force them out, but in the end, she was the one who lost her place. And the family she targeted walked away stronger than ever, their presence in the neighborhood now undeniable. It was more than just karma. It was justice, the kind that doesn't come from an HOA board or a rulebook, but from life itself.